Get the supermarkets back. I know you can post stuff over there. Right, it's 10 minutes till we start.
Alright then.
3.5 minutes.
Do we need a handheld, Adam Bell?
No.
This is for you. Don't turn it on yet, so the channel blew up.
No, that one's on.
That is
Handheld's on, but yours is on.
Oh, mine has to stay off.
Yes.
Oh, right, that's okay. Forget what I
That's
said.
our Eurovision song.
Yeah.
A remix of Country Roads.
Oh God. I mean, fuck.
Try not to fuck it up again.
Everybody.
About 2 minutes.
Right. Okay, ready. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Walk, Wank, Wake. Welcome to Wake. I am your host, Leonie McDonough. You might recognize me from being here yesterday. That was me. I was here yesterday. Alan, I have to. Alan, I don't know which camera to look into.
That's okay, just the one in front of you.
But is it gone? This one? There's 3 in front. There's 4 or 5. That's not an answer. But here, anyway, but last night was good. Last night went really well. I felt like it went really well. And then afterwards, I went upstairs. The hunger hits me after I do the gig, and I knew there was leftover Chinese, so I went up to the room upstairs. It's a quite sneaky little cold spring roll after the gig, feeling it was a good gig. And then I hear Adam Turkington come up. I actually recognise his steps on the stairs, and he comes into the room, and he's got his thinking face on. He's, you know, you can see his brain is working things out. He comes in and he goes, "Listen, the thing is," right, and it was hoping for an ominous. He said, "Leonie, the thing is, you are going in a different direction." And my heart, because I thought, oh my God, he's going to, you know, people are here for philosophy and you're flitting on about and wanting yes, no answers, and it's all too silly and frivolous, and that's not what you gotta, you know, get your shit together. And I was like, oh, you know, and my spring roll hanging on my mouth with fear. And then Adam Turkington goes on to say, 3 of the lads are going to North Belfast, and there's another 2 who live over in West, and you're the only one going to East Belfast, so will you just get a taxi on your own? Sweet relief, lads, sweet relief. I was like, are you serious? That's all you're talking. Yeah, taxis. Okay, that's fine. Taxis. So that was, thanks Adam for that.
All right.
Put my heart crossways. Yeah, anyway, people loved Duke Special last night. People are also saying, this was nice, they're saying, I could never line up the money or the time to get all the way to Belfast to Wake, but now I can be at Wake online, and that is a beautiful thing. So tonight we've got a great lineup with loads. Let's go meet some people. Let's say hello to our musicians this evening. This is Ada Storm and the JBR Project. Hi guys.
Hi, how are you?
JBR Project stands for John Boy Racer, isn't that right?
No.
Reefer.
Raver.
How'd you know that?
Because Jenna, Ada Storm told me.
She's revealing all my secrets.
What? Yeah, she's told me loads of other things about you, but I'm not going to say it online.
Right.
But usually you play individually, but you've started playing together.
Yeah. I did the odd jazz gig, and then John was playing.
Techno.
John plays techno.
John plays techno.
Techno.
John was playing in a very good session in Bangor, Northern Ireland, back bar session in a bar called Fealties, and I went up to him after the gig and said,
I think you're really hot. Do you want to get into bed with me?
No, I said,
No.
would you like to sample my voice? And then he said, actually, I'd like someone to sing. No.
Do you sing techno now?
I sing techno now.
Are you going to sing techno for us?
That's what we're going to do, yeah.
That is so exciting. Let's have a quick chat with Johnny McEwen. Here, tell us about how Icon, there's a request to hear more about Icon, the Belfast thing you did.
Yeah, I went along to the first one, just as like a punter.
Tell us what it is.
It's
in 3 sentences.
It's in 3 sentences. It was a conversation between people of faith and people of no faith, moving in different directions, and a kind of creative outpouring around those conversations. So that was kind of an really interesting group of people, and we met in pubs in Belfast.
But you're in the menagerie a lot, and the menagerie is the biggest kip going, isn't it?
Yeah, that was partly why we liked it.
Yeah.
And the bars stayed open, so randomers came in and stuff, and we just kind of like dealt with the chaos. So chaos was a big part of it. I went along to the first one, I was going to tell you, and just to see what was happening, I heard about this guy, Peter Rollins. People say, you guys should meet. I kind of went, yeah, you should. So I went along to the first one, and I thought, I should get involved in this Icon thing. for two reasons. One was I thought I could make it better by putting it ambient music to tie everything together.
Yeah.
And the second thing was I was genuinely worried that Pete was too charismatic and might start a cult. And I thought in my...
It's a big fear.
I
It's
thought
a
I could
big
stop
fear.
that happening. I couldn't.
Yeah, it's like we're in it now. We're on the cult.
I tried really hard.
We get Peter Rollins on. I want to read out, because this resonated with me as well. This is Anna Jennings.
Oh, hey, Anna.
Hi, Anna. And I met Anna at Spark.
Yes.
Okay, so Anna writes, they just kind of breezed over it, but when Pete asked, what was your death of God, he used a broken heart as an example. I'd love to hear more about that. If you watched his talk a couple of weeks ago at Revolution Church on Facebook, he goes into it more and talks about step 0. I remember you mentioning that as well last night. Step 0 is like just being in the room, isn't it, with other people? As someone who's sober over 26 years, this is hard to believe because to look at Anna, you think, did she start drinking when she was 4 and then give up when she was 8? Because she says she's sober over 26 years. It's incredible. And it's fascinating to think that when I hit bottom, lost everything familiar and had what I've always considered to be my spiritual experience, when I found God was actually my death of God moment.
Yes.
Okay, and this is the part that I was like, whoa, yes, this makes loads of sense to me. She says, it dissolves much of the conflict I have about the concept of God being a byproduct of fear.
Yeah.
Because that's what I think. It's just a way of making you behave. God is just there to shame you and keep you down, and the fear of God in you. They put the fear of God in you, and that's what it's about.
Yeah.
But then, she's asking, I guess we rambled off there, but she says, when you say, what was your death of God? He used a broken heart as an example. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes. Okay.
So would I, Pete.
Well, without getting too personal, maybe
That's
after a
what
few
we
drinks.
want!
Yeah. Well,
No, okay, you don't have to.
No, I can. Well, for a lot of people, that is the death of God experience because you think that someone's going to complete you, make you whole. You think that, so, people don't necessarily believe in God. People believe in a commodity. So often there's commodity satisfaction or psychedelic enlightenment or sexual or romantic love. And movies all have this, that it's about two people working to be together. And then the movie ends when they're together. Because if it kept going, another half an hour, you'd be arguing about who takes the rubbish out. And you'd be kind of like, who picks up the kids at school, right? It can't stop. It has to stop there because obviously relationships are difficult. Lacan says there's a non-relation. Actually, we don't fit. People don't work together. And that's what makes relationships good. It's actually the friction, the not having. But for many people, the death of romance is the death of God because that's the experience that the universe is not whole and complete, that you're not whole and complete, that someone else won't fix you. And so for a lot of people, that is their experience of this nihilistic contradiction that I'm talking about. And that's probably my experience, yeah.
He's not giving much away there, Anna, is he? He's not really giving us the juicy personal story.
Okay, what do you want? How do you do that? Names?
No, I don't. Because I think, I would be nosy. We just know, you'd be like, geez, come on, give us the ins and outs of it.
Yeah.
But no, you don't have to
A few
give us
more
the ins and outs.
drinks. Let's see what happens tonight. Okay, I'm just drinking club soda at the moment. So
And maybe Anna wants the nosy ins and outs of it, or maybe she does not at all. She's got a lot more grace than I do. But I'd be like, give us the juice. But no, you don't have to.
Yeah, well, the other thing is an analyst, you don't get to know anything about an analyst, so you can project all this stuff onto them. And then the analyst uses all that projection to kind of help you come to know yourself. So some of my work is I try to, nobody knows anything, and then they can project anything on. And then,
so if we knew too much, we would kind of ruin the mystery about you.
Exactly,
so actually, you're right, I don't want to know.
Exactly, there you go. It's more mysterious.
Keep that shit to yourself, Peter, all right? No, I don't care how much you've drank.
Yes.
Okay, Anna, comment in. I hope you're happy with that.
That was a rubbish answer, Anna. I just apologise.
Well, it's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
But then, like you were saying, I won't be afraid to ask that kind of like, there's no such thing as this, death of God. What do you mean, the death of God? What's God to you? When we're talking in metaphor here. Are we talking, snowing and putting the balls back on the table metaphor? Are we talking like when you say the death of God? That's what
do I mean? So
yeah.
For me, the word God.
What do you mean by that?
So the concept of God is the concept of the absolute. So some people call it the one, the absolute, ultimate reality, the real.
The absolute, okay.
It's just, people use God sometimes to talk about someone in the sky or whatever. No, I use it philosophically. God is simply the name of ultimate reality. So when I talk about the death of God, and I'll kind of cover a little bit of this tonight, it's kind of the idea that ultimate reality is divided. ultimate reality is not at one with itself.
Ultimate reality is about it. It is not at one with itself.
It's like in quantum physics, when an object like light is a wave and a particle.
Oh, yes. Okay,
It's
yeah.
kind of so, and this notion of the universe not being at one with itself means we're always trying to find oneness, wholeness, completeness. We're always trying to get rid of the chaos. We're always trying to find some sort of utopia. If contradiction lies at the heart of reality, then that's a fool's errand. It will always feel we'll always end up destroying ourselves and other people. And actually, the challenge of life is to enjoy the contradiction, enjoy the chaos that is in cosmos, the contingency that's in necessity, the dark that's in light. So that's what the death of God means for me.
That's good.
There you go.
It's kind of relief because I'm brought up knowing that, you know, God is Jesus' dad and he's up in heaven and, you know, just let's have the fear of God and then we'll all behave and keep in line. And if it wasn't for them, sure, how would we know how to behave properly?
Yes, and that's the first notion of God. And I would argue, so a philosopher never asks, does God exist? A philosopher asks, does the concept of God exist? Because philosophers aren't interested in reality, as physicists are interested in reality. Philosophers are interested in ideas.
Yeah.
So I had this conversation with someone recently because they were kind of going, Pete, do you believe in God? And I couldn't understand. I was trying to answer it and I realized, because I just assume as a philosopher, you mean, do I believe the concept of God exists? And I go, of course the concept exists.
Yeah.
And then I'm interested in that. And the first concept of God is the concept of God as this powerful being up in the sky, But then, interestingly, that concept over history develops to the point at which you have this notion of God saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? So God experiences the loss of God. And Hegel says that is the point when you realize that the universe is not at one with itself. And so Hegel was before quantum mechanics and all of that, and before evolution, because evolution is the not at oneness of biological organisms. He was before all of that, but he predicted it all. He says what you'll find in science is that every science will eventually come to discover that there is an incompleteness to reality. And he called that absolute knowledge. And that is what he called the death of God.
Some heavy shit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we have some music, will we?
Yeah, let's do that.
Take it away. It's the JBR Project.
Hello, Wake Festival. Hello to Australia. And hello to the Netherlands. This next song is called Crow's Feet. Hello to Donica. Crow's feet hit a beat
going to go on about God. I'm not here for that. But actually, I get it now. Okay.
Great.
Is there anything else I want to say? That's it. Okay, it's over
Perfect.
to you.
Okay,
Give it
over
over
to
to
me.
Kim Rollins, the Profane Temple.
The Profane Temple, thank you very much. It was really nice to hear Johnny talk a little bit about Icon, because that's kind of, I guess, where all this started. Back when I was, what age? In my early 20s? I don't know. Early 20s, we'll say that. And I remember I was supposed to learn French. I was doing a PhD. It must have been my mid or late 20s, actually. I was supposed to learn French, and I never did. But I had a French tutor who I was trying to learn French with, and we went for a drink one time to the Menagerie bar. And we were having a couple of drinks, and I was saying to her, I'd really love to do something in a bar like this, where people are able to give voice to their doubts and their unknowing and those parts of themselves that maybe on a daily basis you repress. They come up in your dreams, but then you wake up. Because often we're most awake when we dream, because that's where the truth comes. And so sometimes the truth is so powerful that we have to wake ourselves up in order to dream, in order to pretend that everything is fine, in order to pretend that this is who I am and not all of the things that come up in the night. And I said, it'd be really nice to do something. It would be music and poetry and art. And she said, why don't you just go up and ask Francie at the bar if you can use his bar for something like that. So I went up to the bar, I asked Francie, and he says, what is it like? And I said, I don't know. It's just, it'll just be kind of like art and music, and it'll be a bit weird, but there's nobody here. It's a Sunday night. We'll bring a few people to the bar. And he said, okay. He says, I'll put you in for 3 weeks' time. And then I had 3 weeks to try to make something up. And I went round and I picked a few friends who I knew were musicians and artists and storytellers. And we did this night called Apocalypse. And it was all about the idea. An apocalypse is an event that happens that utterly ruptures your world and transforms it, something you never imagined. You can predict certain things, and then there are things that happen in your life that you never predicted. You couldn't put into the calendar, whether it's the death of someone you love or the birth of someone or a breakup or a new relationship. These events that happen that we can't really predict. And so it was all about how apocalypse happens in our lives and how do we kind of be open to those events and be open to the possibilities that they create, because they change your future and they also change the past. You can be really depressed and unhappy and alone, and then you meet somebody and they don't just change the future, but the past feels like an Old Testament prophecy waiting for the meeting of that person. So they also the apocalyptic event also helps you re-understand everything that's gone on before. And at the end, we had about, 40 or 50 people showed up. And so Francie didn't even ask. He just says, okay, I'll put you on next month. And that was the beginning of Icon. And at that time, I didn't know what it was about, really. I just had an intuition that we need a desert in the oasis of our lives, a place of quietness where we're able to hear something speak that we repress in our daily lives. So that was kind of it. And this was going to be the place where people could do that. And tonight we're going to explore that. Actually, I'm going to be talking with Gladys Ganiel. He's a sociologist and has written about Icon, what we call transformance art. And so she's an expert in that. And she's very annoying because she never trusts what I say about it. So I do a lot of theory and I talk about what it is and all the philosophy. She doesn't care. She studied it and she looks at what it does. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. But what I want to do, what I want to do briefly is, cover the basic points of what we did last night and then into tonight. So as I said, the first night, I wanted to define this notion of the death of God. I wanted to give as clear a notion of what it means as possible, not as a poetic term, but as a philosophical term. Then tonight, I want to look at the idea of the wake of God. And then tomorrow, how do we remain faithful to this wake of God? So yesterday, basically, I gave this genealogy. I said that the idea that God dies is utterly absurd initially, because God is a necessarily existing eternal being. Either you believe God exists and therefore cannot die, or you believe God does not exist, therefore is not alive and cannot die. So the idea of God dying is a type of absurdity, like a square triangle. But the notion first arises in Judaism with Paul, right? This notion where he says Christ crucified, he talks about God dying. That was a very bizarre idea. And then I talked about how that idea didn't really gain traction for thousands of years. So it didn't gain traction in the early church, early Christian art, not really interested in the crucifixion in a central way. But then with Luther takes it up and makes it into a theological concept. And then I talked about how the next person was Hegel, who takes the concept and makes it philosophical. And for Hegel, what he basically meant by it, as I mentioned, is he said that basically the world has a type of contradiction built into it. The cosmos has a chaos at its heart. And the death of God is a reflection of that. The absolute, the core of reality experiences a nothingness, a lack, a death within it. Being and nothingness are intertwined. And he says this is absolute knowledge. When you finally realize this, you get to some sort of insight about the nature of reality. It's not that we don't know what ultimate reality is. Ultimate reality doesn't know what it is. Ultimate reality is not at one with itself. And something I touched on but didn't say too much about is that this is connected to freedom. So in philosophy, this is freedom because the fact that the universe is not at one with itself means that there is a certain contingency or randomness built into everything. So it's not that I have free acts. I am freedom. Human beings don't do free things. Human beings are the freedom of the universe. We are the result of the not at oneness of the world, right? Won't get into that in too much detail, but that's, but it's, but yeah, this is, see, when Hegel says the end of history, which I mentioned last night, in the 19th century, where in politics we realize there's no undivided other, no political leader, no individual who has the answer. We're all divided. We're all castrated, right? I mentioned that what comes after the end of history is Nietzsche. And Nietzsche comes in and he says that we deny the death of God. We pretend it hasn't happened. So the existentialists come up and the existentialists say that we are afraid of our freedom. We want someone to tell us the answer. We want something to complete us. We want something to satisfy us, whether it's the commodity, whether it's love, whatever it is, something that will fix everything and give satisfaction. And for Nietzsche, this is the denial of the death of God. We are wanting some sort of peace, some sort of utopia, and this causes all sorts of problems. And then I mentioned that psychoanalysis then comes after existentialism as the technology that is designed to help you confront the death of God, which means psychoanalysis is the technology that's designed to help you realize that life is difficult, that it keeps going, there is struggle and there is sacrifice. And that this isn't bad. This is actually where the joy is. This is where the fun of life is. If we were to get everything we want, we would fall into melancholy. We would fall into a type of living death. And so somehow we need to find a way to affirm the struggles of life. And I also mentioned the notion of the beta element, which is the traumatic elements you have as a child, for example, when there's a too muchness to life, you can't articulate it, something terrible is happening, it's a beta element. And I talked about the alpha function, which is where the parent takes this chaos of the child into them in a non-anxious way, and then speaks it, puts it into language, sings a nursery rhyme, says something soothing, begins to symbolize the real of the trauma. They alphabeticize. They bring the beta element, they make it into something alpha. They alphabeticize. So that's yesterday. Now, the reason for all of that is because if this is true, right? Let's just do a big if, right? If there is something about antagonism hard-baked into reality, if there is something about dissatisfaction being connected to satisfaction, darkness being connected to light, chaos being connected to cosmos, right? Then we need a structure to help us alphabeticize it. That's the beta element. The trauma of life is that we are free, that there is no one who can tell us exactly what to do, that we don't know for sure whether we should stay with that person or leave them. And it doesn't matter if we go to someone who reads our palm, or we look at the tarot, or we pray, or we at the back of that Bible. What was the Bible they put in the hotels? Gideon's. In the back of those Gideon's Bibles, that every question has an answer, and there's a little Bible verse to the answers. Am I alone in the universe? I'm sick. What should I do? I can't program the VCR. It's all there, all a Bible verse, But the idea is that we have to actually affirm our freedom, and somehow make decisions in what Kierkegaard says in fear and trembling, not knowing what's going to happen, and not being able to find someone to tell us what we should do. This is a traumatic thing, and we need art and music and comedy and poetry and speaking to help us put language to that trauma, to help us symbolize it, to help us embrace it. And Icon, Transformace art, the work that we do, is designed to alphabetize that trauma. That's what it is. That's what Icon was. You go in and you confront that part of reality. So very quickly, I want to say that you've got, say, fundamentalist liturgy, right? Fundamentalist liturgy is one where if you're a fundamentalist, you say you believe in the oneness and wholeness of everything, that there is, so it's very New Age as well, there is a wholeness to the universe, there's this fall from it, and there'll be a return to it, right? Now, the truth is, fundamentalism is not certainty, it's repressed uncertainty. So if you remember last night, I said that for Hegel, the death of God is an historical event. Most of us know it. We deny it, but we know it. Just like the difference between someone who's certain of what they believe because they're a kid and they've never encountered someone who thinks differently, and then they encounter someone who thinks differently, and now, if they repress that, if they deny it, then that's fundamentalism. It's not being sure of what you believe, it's being unsure of what you believe and repressing that uncertainty, which creates a reaction formation, which then you look incredibly certain, and you get angry with people whenever they disagree with you. You can't tolerate difference. All of this is the symptom of the denial of your freedom. So if you say that a fundamentalist liturgy is a type of repression of the death of God, and you, by the way, you notice this within evangelical communities, so many leaders behind closed doors, I know loads of them, will say that they don't believe half of what they say. And the thing is, the congregation knows that. Everybody knows it. It's an open secret. The point is they just have to pretend they do. It's an act, as long as you don't say it. I talked to a leader who was going, I don't know if I believe in this whole literal resurrection thing. And I was like, yeah, but why are you so freaked out about that? And she was saying, well, if I said that in my church, they'd kick me out. And I was like, well, do you think the other leaders don't think like that? And she was like, I'm sure they do. So like, so it's not having that belief, it's just saying it. That's the problem, right? You can have the belief as long as you hide it and you pretend you have certainty. So what that does is it means the structure is there so that you play the game and everybody can deny that thing. In contrast, you look at progressive church communities and liturgies. They don't affirm belief necessarily. You can doubt everything, you can not believe, you can believe whatever, it's not important. But you have a liturgical structure that believes on your behalf. You sing songs about certainty and about utopia and heaven. There's prayers and there's rituals. It's like the child who, believes in Santa Claus and the parent doesn't, but the parent gets the enjoyment of the belief because the child believes. You get the enjoyment of the belief that everything is whole and complete because the liturgical structure believes on your behalf. As long as it affirms it in its actions, you can be enlightened and have doubts and questions without existentially experiencing those in your being. In contrast, the parotheological liturgy is a liturgy that embodies doubt, complexity, ambiguity, and unknowing in the music, in the art, in the speaking. You enter into that space and you, through the music, begin to encounter those dimensions of your life. And it is not oppressive, it's not destructive, it actually makes you feel freer and lighter as a result. As you speak the truth, or as that truth of your doubts and unknowing comes to the surface, you find freedom. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. You will encounter that truth, and that truth will liberate you. So that's, in a nutshell, what Transformace art is trying to do, what the liturgy that I'm exploring is attempting to do, to kind of create that space. There's a story I think captures this well, and it's the story of Paddy Englishman, Paddy Irishman, Paddy Scotsman. And they all enter this competition, and the competition is to create a sheep pen to see how many sheep they can fit in it. The person who fits the most sheep wins the competition, right? So this is in Ireland. They like sheep and sheep pens. When I was young, they had a show called One Man and His Dog. There was literally a show where one man would whistle at his dog and his dog would get the sheep in a pen, right? So that's true. That was our national television show, right? So this is a competition, and the three guys are working away. So Paddy English guy gets all the wood, gets all the material, nails it all together, creates a sheep pen that can fit 50 sheep. So that was very good. Then the old Paddy Scotsman, he builds something even bigger, right? It fits 120 sheep. But this Paddy Irishman, this guy Seamus, he's just sitting, getting an Irish tan, right, and not doing any work. And then eventually, about half an hour before the judges are going to look at his work, he picks up 4 pieces of wood, puts a piece of wood in front of him, piece of wood to either side of him, and one behind him, starts to nail it. So he's standing in this square that's about 3 feet by 3 feet. And the judges come up, and they look at this, and they say, listen, Seamus, that's tiny, that sheep pen. You wouldn't even get 1 sheep in that. And Seamus says, he says, I'm not standing in the sheep pen. You are, right? Now that is the response to secularism. That's the paratheological response to the secular world, right? People look at the temple and they say, you're standing in the sacred. That's the place you go for wholeness and completeness, thinking that everything is going to be great. Everything will somehow resolve itself in some sort of utopic thinking, laughing, going, that's what the temple is. But the response is no. You're the ones who are standing in the sacred. You think that romance will make you whole and complete, or commodity satisfaction, always chasing more money and more fame, more this, more that. You don't know this. This is the Nietzschean notion. When he says that God is dead, he's talking to people who don't believe in God, and yet who act as if there is something that will fix everything. The profane temple is a space outside of the sacred, a space in which we encounter unhappiness. Not where we're free to pursue what will make us happy, but where we are freed from the pursuit of what will make us happy, where we are free from this frenetic desire for certainty, satisfaction, for completeness, for wholeness, and where we somehow make peace with the contradiction that we are, not so that we despair, but so that we can find the satisfaction and dissatisfaction, the gain that is within sacrifice, the beauty that is within the dark, the cosmos within the chaos. So that is, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to do. Now, in Icon, they only ever let me talk for 5 minutes because they knew I would batter on about philosophy all the time if I was allowed to speak for more. So I want to stop now. I'm going to have some music, and then Gladys is going to come in and we're going to talk practically about what this looks like. How do we create these deserts in the oasis? These are, because this is a political act, by the way. If we can have thousands of these types of communities, tens of thousands of these communities, with hundreds of people in them, people who are able to feel and experience that lack and that loss, who are freed from the frenetic pursuit of something that will bring wholeness and completeness, you will find that that has a real transformation in the economic and political realms.
Down on your heartstrings, this whole house heats up and hums. Don't say love unless you mean it. Don't say love unless you mean it. Don't say love unless you mean it. house is a mess. On your heartstrings, this whole house, she heats up and hums. Love won't grow unless you feed it. Love won't grow unless you feed it. Love won't grow unless you feed it. Yeah. This house is a mess.
It's time to introduce the main event of the evening, besides the other events, which are also the main events. One of the main events that's happening right now. Please welcome to the stools. It is Dr. Peter Rollins. And who Dr.
Doctor,
Gladys?
yeah.
Welcome to Doctors. It's Gladys and Pete.
Well, I have the hardest job in this entire festival because I am meant to make Pete talk about practical things.
Yes.
So I thought I would start at first just to give a little sense of where I come from.
Yeah.
Right. So I work at Queen's University and I'm a sociologist. So I'm looking at Pete's stuff from a social scientific of religion perspective, really. And I first encountered Icon nearly 20 years ago now, when I was working on my PhD, and I was doing my PhD in Dublin, and I was studying evangelicalism and conflict in Northern Ireland. So I was interested in the role evangelicalism had played in the conflict here and how evangelical identities were changing, perhaps as people were critiquing the kind of right-wing evangelical tradition and trying to build peace through, reworking that tradition, whatever. And through that process, I started studying a group called 028. Yeah. So a lot of icon people were involved in 028, which is the telephone area code for Northern Ireland. That's why it was called that, because it's bringing everybody together, right? And everybody in 028 kept telling me, oh, you got to go to this icon thing. You got to go to this icon thing. So I kind of accidentally started studying icon because I was interested in evangelical activism and how evangelical identities were changing, becoming more moderate and contributing to peace and so forth. So the initial process, I suppose, I was studying when I was looking at icon was how identity was changing. And the thing that struck me was, obviously I was studying evangelicalism, but so many people were from that evangelical background. And the concept of God, I suppose, that you've been describing over the course of this festival and through much of your career is it's a modern God, but it's also a very evangelical God. So the whole icon critique, I thought, was caught up in critiquing that God and everybody kind of going through a deconversion type of experience. Yes. And then going on from that, I'm interested in the social effect, how religion functions and affects society and affects politics. So I was also interested in how the activism of these different evangelical groups was making a difference in Northern Ireland. So icon, for that part of it, I was a bit puzzled at the time, right? Yes. And I think some of the critique of that...
Because I don't think icon fits with any of that. I can't think, but keep going. Yeah,
but they were and some of what Phil was saying last night about, well, how does this, matter in the real world was a question I don't think I resolved in the part of my PhD dissertation about icon, as it were. So I suppose that by way of... kind of maybe asking an initial question about maybe that process of identity change and how it happened and how that fed into the creation of icon. What were people kind of going through?
Yeah, and it is interesting that your work was in evangelicalism, because most people coming to icon were either evangelical, post-evangelical, but kind of in that kind of world. Yeah. And I wasn't able to articulate then exactly what I was doing, but it was a certain form of critique of that or moving through that into something else. So that definitely is where icon began in many ways. And taking, I suppose, for me, my first book was all about mysticism. Because that's the first step within a religion, is how to get people to open up to doubt and unknowing, is actually introduce a bit of mysticism. So early icon was almost introducing mysticism into evangelicalism, but that was only a gateway drug to kind of a more radical position. So I can see why you took an interest. But you also, this is what I love about talking to Gladys, is because you also have different language and terminology coming from sociology. Yeah. And as I say, you're studying it primarily in terms of its social effect, who the people were that go. I mean, you're actually asking people what they got out of it. But don't ask people what they get out of it. Ask me what they get out of it. I'll tell you. Don't listen to people. But yeah, you were actually interviewing people. You were looking at it in terms of its connection to wider religion. And I was always interested in, because I'm always, like, you did work in emerging church. And I was always like, icon's not emerging church. So what do you think about that? Is icon emerging church to you?
Well, myself and Gerardo Marti have written an entire book about the emerging church that opens with a vignette of an icon. Right? So you're in the book, whether you like it or not. And I mean, part of the reason...
I suppose we were at that stage, because emerging church was wide at that point.
Well, and I mean, you've told the story before. Many people at Icon said this to me. You never had heard of the emerging church, so people started telling you were part of it, right, when you went to Greenbelt and so forth. But the emerging church, it emerged out of evangelicalism. So there's a similar origin story there with Icon and the wider American movement. So that's part of the reason for the inclusion, and also. When P was saying about the social processes, that's what I'm interested in studying. The way groups of people form new religious communities, that is what the emerging church was doing. So the social process of what Icon was doing is quite similar to groups that have very different conceptions of God and Christ's divinity and all these issues, very different than Icon has. But the social process was very similar in terms of collectives and trying to be creative and critiquing the evangelical tradition. So all those structural similarities are there. So
it looked very similar on the surface as well. Yeah, that's true. Actually, there was a lot of, in terms of the musical style, a lot of candles, a lot of sitting in circles or whatever. There was, and for me, some of that then hid. Like at first, actually, when you wrote that book, there was so many similarities. I think the differences began to arise over the last 5 or 10 years. And the emergent, would you even say the emergent church exists anymore in any shape or form?
Well, I stopped studying it, right? So I don't speak as someone that's actually paying that much of attention anymore. But to me, also the thing about the emerging church was that, most in the sociology of religion, people like to measure religious success or whatever by how well the institution produces itself. And the emerging church is, to a certain degree, or was to a certain degree, anti-institutional. So the point was not to produce an institution that would produce itself. It would be maybe to influence other institutions. But then as a sociologist, that's really hard to measure if this movement that kind of appeared for a while and disappeared, did it continue to influence throughout the wider, denominations and traditions and so forth, which I suspect it has. But again, I've not researched it. Currently, I'm doing Irish stuff.
Is that right? Okay. Well, I mean, for a lot of you know the emerging church and what it was, and the way I see it is that so it's died as a movement in some respects, and mostly went into either progressive kind of traditional. Some people went into process theology. That was a tiny thing, tripped full of you. Some stayed within evangelicalism, I guess. Yeah. And then there was this radical wing, which is what I was trying to represent. We're still going. But my worry with the emerging church was that there was nothing theologically, like it was still this traditional notion of like a type of progress of history and movement towards kind of this wholeness, and all of that language was still there. Like that was ultimately my critique of it.
Yes, and there was a different conception of doubt as well,
very much
I suppose. So. And
it's almost like you doubted in the sense of you don't have insight into the absolute. Yeah. So that's epistemological humility, where you don't have access to the real, which of course we don't know everything. But yes, what I'm interested in the Hegelian sense is, no, it's not that you don't know the truth doesn't know itself, and that's different.
Yes. So, but I have to get you back to the practical piece, right? That's your job. That's your job. So, because one of the things that also has interested me about the story of Icon, I suppose, is it actually started with the practical, from what many people told me, and that kind of later the conceptual justification was brought in by you, right? Yes. So if you're starting with the practical, so maybe if you just spoke a little bit about how, what the practical looked like, how you created an Icon event.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to, because I suddenly was going to go to theory there. Right? Very practically, what was beautiful was basically a pile of us. Johnny was there from the beginning. We'd go to the bar once a week. And sometimes it would be that an idea, like someone would think of a title or a concept, and often I came with an idea, that was me. Or sometimes it would just be an image. So Johnny would come and he would go, they really look beautiful if the menagerie was full of broken wine glasses, and all with wine poured into the wine glasses, and we were pouring the wine in, and we'd like start there, and then the gathering would build. Somebody would go, that reminds me of this idea of communion, but like a broken communion, and maybe we could do a sins of the father. That became the sins of the father, where we talked about where the God had sinned against us. And so week one, we would throw around some interesting ideas. Johnny would often say, let's do something that will offend us. What would we find difficult? That was his thing. And we would think about it, have an idea, meet the next week, and we'd begin to flesh it out. Third week, we'd give out jobs. Padraig, can you do some poetry? Johnny, can you do some ambient music? And then the fourth week, we all turned up at the menagerie and put the event on. And that was the very practical, what we did once a month. So that was a transformance art. And then there were the decentering practices. And the decentering practices, I'm going to use all know, but the Last Supper, Atheism for Lent, the Omega Project, Evangelism Project. Yeah. And those were the decentering projects that also happened on and off.
Yes, and I had the privilege, I suppose, of sitting in on some icon meetings as part of my research, and I'm not.
What was it like from your perspective?
I am not the most sort of artistically creative person, and I was just kind of like, oh my goodness, these people are, in my mind I think these people are really, really talented. Yeah. No wonder these events look so, well, I mean, impressive, really. I suppose so. The process for me was like, this is really amazing, but I also thought, your average group of people is not going to sit around doing this and come up with something like that, which is perhaps a problem.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm currently thinking about how I do transformance art that is more sustainable than what we did in Belfast. So we had we got an incredible group of people together. I think anyone can do it. But it is harder work. It's once a month. We did it maybe 9 times a year, took a few months off, did one festival in England once a year. Yeah. And it was, so like Johnny was great. Like he'd come in and go like, it'd be amazing if we took a picture of everybody jumping so that we had them all hovering, and maybe get 100 balloons all hovering because they're weighted perfectly, so they're all in the room together. And then we could do something about, like we're hovering between life and death. Yes, it was brilliant. Something a beautiful thing can just arise out of that. But it's hard to do that every week or every month. Yeah. So my thing is actually, what I think transformance art can look like is more like just a standard music, talk, some sort of ritual, and then hanging out and having a drink together, like once a week. But all of it is in the service of... it's like, so in psychoanalysis, if you're my analyst, I come to you, right? The first thing I do is like, Gladys, you're just a normal person like anybody else, right? Why am I paying you? You feel like you're some expert on this, right? Maybe you've got a bit of learning, but you're also just a normal person. That's called the imaginary, and analysis doesn't really start there. But then without realizing it, maybe eventually I start to treat you as my mother. Without knowing it, you become a symbolic figure for me. I say to you, Gladys, you're going to hate me when I tell you this, right? But what I did last week. And you'll be going, why do you think that? Why do you think I would judge you? And I go, well, my mum would have hated it or whatever. Yeah. So without knowing it, now you're a screen upon which I'm projecting my inner objects, my inner relationships. And then the third stage, it's called the real, is when I'm not just projecting onto you, you're somehow inside my subjectivity. You're in my dreams. I'm dreaming of my analyst, and I'm dreaming of my mother, but it's actually you, and you're weirdly in there. At that point, analysis can really start working, because you're now in some weird sense the personification of, say, my mother's passed away, but she's still alive as an object in me. But you're not acting in response. You're in the same way. In fact, you're not saying what she would say. In fact, you're just acting impotent. You're saying nothing. You're not judging me at all. You don't care. And my image can change. In the same way in an icon gathering, you go in and you've got musicians and artists and comedians and all of that, and they're just regular people like anybody else. But then without realizing it, you go enough, you start to project your notion of ultimate reality onto the liturgical structure. You don't know you are. But it's like if a minister gives you the finger, right? It's not the minister, it's God, right? It seems more weird because they're in garb. So, and then the third level is when that liturgical structure actually hooks into your subjectivity. And the point is, I go wanting the absolute to fix everything. And what I get back is something impotent. I get songs about brokenness and doubt and unknowing. So I don't get back the God that I'm projecting out. That transforms my inner relation to that, and then you're free.
Show me a strong arm, show me a tear. Are you a wild one? Are you a thief? Show me. Trick dog, how do you spot the thief? Trick dog, how do you spot that thief? You don't want to face your loss. You don't want to count the cost. He rode up to rescue me. I'm running home to write this down. You don't want to face your loss. You don't want to count the cost. He rode up to rescue me. I'm running home to write this down. But I wanted more. Yes, I wanted more. Warm skin, true love. I wanted warm skin, true love. I wanted warm skin and true love. I wanted warm skin and true love.
Yes, and that whole idea of the sustainability of it, and you know, you're talking about every week it needs to be a practice, you know, the level of creativity and energy and resources needed to do like the main icon event is really, I think, ultimately unsustainable for most groups. And then I suppose there's also the issue of maintaining a relationship with institutional churches. Do you do that or do you not do that? And again, that was a question that came up a lot in the wider study Gerardo and I did of the emerging church in the States. And there really were different perspectives on that. How are you anti-institutional? Should you be anti-institutional, or what kind of relationship should these groups have with wider religious traditions and denominations and so forth? Because I suppose another thing that strikes me about why, you know, a group like Icon works, or why a collective works for some people, is because it is drawing on a common reservoir of Christian ideas, you know? So how is that relationship maintained, or what's the best way to do that, or not?
Yes. I mean, yeah, it's a biggie. So I am an institutionalist through and through. And by what I mean by that is we're liturgical creatures. Whether we go to play poker once a month, go to the coffee shop once a week with friends, we have these liturgical structures that either help us confront life or help us avoid confronting life. So pop music generally helps you avoid confronting life. Getting drunk generally helps you avoid confronting life. You know, loud music at a nightclub might help do that. But the same liturgical technologies don't. If you listen to a singer-songwriter, that, like this music we're listening to tonight, it can help you touch a part of yourself that you could not otherwise have allowed yourself to touch. So you just had a terrible breakup, and you go and you listen to someone sing, and you're listening to them, and then you're able to face that. And instead of getting drunk and forgetting your problems, you have a couple of drinks and you loosen up and you talk about your problems. And, you know, instead of going to a loud pop music to forget, you're listening to a singer-songwriter, you're in a little pub like this talking. That's a liturgy that helps you confront yourself. So for me, we need institutions, like those regular places we go, and that's what Icon is. The other thing is, this is the strategy, right? Is if this is going to work, and I think we're in a lot of trouble in the world at the moment, if this is going to work, doing one or two groups just will do nothing.
Yeah.
Having a few hundred people or a few thousand people does nothing. You need a system. Let's imagine this crazy thing. Let's imagine that there is a system in place around the world where millions of groups are meeting in once a week, sitting together in hundreds, doing some sort of ritualistic activities and preaching and songs, right? And that system is something they're part of potentially their whole life, and they bring their kids to, and they'll be empowered. And imagine that exists. And then imagine you could inject these ideas into that system. Then, and the host takes it, right? The host doesn't reject it. It's very, very difficult, right? But if the host accepts these ideas, then you've already got a whole system. And that's what paratheology is trying to do.
Infiltrate,
yes. But being very honest about it. That's why it's not a secret, right? Being very honest. And going, literally saying, but it's also key, like the whole point of last night was this death of God is not an anti-religious notion. It starts with St. Paul, like literally the notion of the death of God. And Nietzsche, Nietzsche is the new St. Paul. Nietzsche is a reincarnation of the Apostle Paul, basically. Now, Nietzsche, it was one of his few mistakes, as he didn't see it, but for Nietzsche, the death of God was an event that everybody had to experience, just like for the Apostle Paul, the death of God is an event that everyone has to go through. Hegel said it, Nietzsche said it, and so it is connected. It's a theological position. It's a philosophical one as well, but it's a theological position, and I think the host can take it because it's part of the narrative already. It's just the church is Gnostic, it's got this notion of a whole, complete God above or whatever.
Well, and I mean, the church is very diverse, and I mean, in its Catholic and Orthodox and various other incarnations, which I hear you talking, it's
and
still
you're more pro-church than me, aren't you? Because I don't think they're all the same, right?
No, that's still the evangelical Protestant God church, There are different conceptions, so I get where you're coming from, but it's more complicated, yes. Due to that diversity. Yeah.
Where would you say these ideas are in the already existing church?
Well, I mean, I think some of the I'm most familiar with Protestant Catholic traditions, right? I don't know much about Orthodox and so forth, but there is room in some, particularly I think the Catholic or the Anglican, and this may be, we were talking earlier about how some in the emerging church have gone back to those traditional, old style liturgies and approaches, the emphasis on, darkness is my only friend, these sort of things. That one's in my head because I tune into a Compline online group now during lockdown in a local Catholic parish, and that's read every week. You're reminded that darkness is my only friend, Yeah. So you're getting that, and there's also maybe in some ways a more mystical approach in those non-Protestant traditions that maybe resonates more. And I know the mystic thing isn't your thing, but I've heard you say that was a step towards.
Yes, it is. What
you're getting. So it's if you're talking about infiltrating the church, there's different levels of infiltration.
And by the way, I haven't been very successful at it. What I find is it goes a certain way, a certain state, and people go, but the problem is then when anxiety comes back up, people go back to the what Tillich would call superstition, so I haven't been, I've had a few, thought I was having successes with even some mega churches and stuff, and then they end up just becoming either normal or going into the New Age or into, some sort of ersatz god, say into, there's lots of ersatz gods.
And I suppose the other thing, Pete, you learn as a sociologist is that nobody actually believes everything they're supposed to believe, right? So, you know what I mean? The people who are going along to these institutions, we don't know the half of what they're really actually thinking or what they believe or what they're taking on. I think there's also a tendency, for church leaders or whatever, to make assumptions, professional Christians to make assumptions about what the people sitting there actually think, you know, and that can be exciting actually.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So that's another point to bring into it.
And that's interesting because in a way for Icon is what people believe is not important. Now, and for me, like in psychoanalysis, it doesn't matter when you come to and ask what you believe. It's a form of life, not what you believe, but how you believe what you believe. So I don't know if that, so I do think confessional churches have doctrines that believing like in God and Jesus.
Yeah.
They have lots of beliefs, but I think, you know, that's very different from what I'm doing. Whereas it doesn't matter what you believe. Belief is just a contingent thing that's related to, you know, how you were brought up and whatever. But how you believe what you believe is where the radical move is.
Yes, actually, that brings me back to the first time I interviewed you, Pete. Right, so I think this is nearly 20 years ago. So it was some coffee shop on the Lisburn Road, I think. But that was one of the things that still sticks in my mind from the interview. It was pretty similar to what you just said. There's not what you believe; it's whether the belief makes you a better person. I think was the way you put it. Then, so you're like, so if
I changed it a bit now, but
but if Methodism makes you a better person, you know, be a Methodist. Is kind of you know what you had said at the time. And I suppose the other thing that's always come out for me through your work is this idea that you actually believe what you do. You know, you think you believe something, but you don't actually believe it unless that's what you're doing. And to me, that's actually a terrifying idea because, you know, if you kind of look at what you're doing in your life, is it really, maybe to put in the terms you've used for this festival, are you living up to that freedom that you have to you know, to be really truly living? If you're being judged only by your actions in the world, that's a lot tougher than evangelical Protestantism in some ways, isn't it?
I mean, that's key because, like, for me, and this is where I'm influenced by psychoanalysis, but the idea that we don't know what we believe. I mean, that's very key for me. Is, you know, if I want to know what you believe, the last person to ask is you. I mean, you don't know, like, right? You know, you don't believe maybe in ghosts until it's late at night and there's a wind howling outside, but you do. You don't think you do, but you do. That's what I mean. That's what Nietzsche means by the repression of the death of God. Is you believe in the sharks under the bed. I mean, you say you don't believe it, but I can see that you do by your symptoms. What I would say now, I used to say your beliefs are in your actions. I think I was inaccurate. I think your beliefs are in your symptoms. So if you want to know what someone believes and how you look at their outburst, you look at the very point when someone says, that's not me, that's the truth. That's why analysts are always looking for Freudian slips. The very moment you say, oh, I didn't mean to say my mother. You're like, okay, well, I know you didn't mean it. So that's the truth spoke. It's not your intentionality. That's the truth. And that's very key for me. So a lot of religion for me is not about telling you what to believe. It's about helping you discover your beliefs. So a lot of my work is about how do you discover your beliefs? How do you confront your beliefs that you hate yourself? I know somebody recently, they were drinking too much and they got someone to hate them. And I realized that they hate themselves, but they can't. But what they do is they want their friends to hate them. They say the most horrible things and they externalize their own self-hatred to get other people to hate them. So it's called projective identification, but where now they can get their belief back to them without knowing it's their belief. And it's very sad to see that they're literally making people hate them because that's how they feel about themselves. So for me, that person gradually helping them realize, no, you hate yourself. You don't know this. You hate yourself. And you're getting that person to hate you because that's how you feel about yourself.
And I mean, actually listening to you say that, trying to bring it back to the practical again, in some ways, you know, if you're taking people through a process like this, through these liturgical events, you know, this is potentially terrifying for people. Do you need people with specialist training to be pastorally responsible in such a situation? Yeah, I think so. That's why I do a lot of theory, a lot of practice. There's a lot of technical things that are useful to know. You know, it's and because here's the thing, by the way, this is why you can't meditate your way to the unconscious. By the way, this is why you need a third, right? Like meditation and drugs all have their place, but the reason, if you're a Freudian, the reason why you can't get to the unconscious is because the unconscious isn't deep within you. So you can go deep within you in meditation, and that's nice, but actually your unconscious is on the surface. And what happens is like in the example I used of this woman, she is projecting onto you. She's making you, say it's me, I'm making you hate me. I'm poking you, I'm making you despise me because I despise myself. I don't know that.
Now, if you're trained, you don't respond. Yeah. You don't get caught in what's called countertransference. You don't get angry. You feel it and you go, my goodness, you're trying to make me angry with you. Why?
Yeah.
And poof, it suddenly breaks. Now, when you're not trained and you don't know how countertransference is, you will, what's called projective counter identification, you will become what the person wants you to be. You're so intolerant, you're so angry, you're so this, you're so that. I'm not angry. There you go, I'm not angry, right? And suddenly I've made you, into what I want you to be, so I can project that anger into you. So yes, there is a certain amount of training, and a lot of the training is just to allow the transference on and realize that they're telling you their truth. Everyone's telling the truth all the time. And I listen to how you're making me feel, and then I just feed it back. So yeah, there is training involved, but it's not a lot, but it's more just, and the basic training is to go through it yourself. So I always recommend people go through psychoanalysis, because I think that's a good basic. Yeah. You go through it, you feel it yourself, you get into conversation with your own unconscious, you start to realize how that works. Like, the people we attack are often a repressed part of ourselves. And that's a basic thing that people don't know. When they're attacking someone on Twitter, they're often attacking their younger self, right? Yeah. They're attacking some part of their repressed self. And if you can help them see that, it's very beneficial.
I don't wanna walk. I don't wanna fight with you no more. I just wanna love. I just wanna stand in truth. I don't wanna walk. When the wind blows, I'm a fortress. I'm a dragon. I'm a goddess. When the wind blows, she is built for pain that I decline. milk flowing rain. While I open my head.
So, for people who are watching now, then, and they might have started their own community, or they're thinking of starting their own community, or they're wondering about hanging in their church, or what would you say in terms of what do you do? How do you make those decisions?
Yeah. Are you thinking like people who want to set something up, or just like leaders, or are you kind of thinking of?
Well, I mean, again, I'm just trying to bring it back to the practical. If these ideas are, if you're a person sitting watching and these ideas resonate with you, how do you express it? And then,
Okay, yeah. So here's a good example. This is where Johnny's amazing, and we should do some stuff on Zoom about this sometime. Is that you could, for example, if you're in a confessional church, and say you're a musician or you're a pastor, you might go, listen, we're going to explore the Psalms. The Psalms are full of anger and aggression and doubt and all of that. And then you do a couple of sermons on that. And then you go, like, by the way, there's some local musicians. I heard them play at this coffee shop, and they sing all about love and hate and desire and doubt. And so I've just invited them to come and do some music as part of. So you set it up with the Psalms, whatever. Yeah. But basically you're starting very subtly to create an environment where these ideas can be expressed. So I think you can do it within those contexts. Yeah. Most of the time you'll get kicked out eventually, that's usually what happens. And you probably have to do it yourself. But we're trying to do a movement here. Like you have to do this. You can do this. You can set these up yourself, right? And we'll help you do it. You might be able to do it in communities that you already have, or start one yourself, And
that actually intrigues me about, you mentioned the Psalms there, but the use of biblical resources, because I suppose one of the things from my study of religion conflict here is that the religious peace builders who are most effective were the ones that were able to take the resources from the tradition and rework it, critique it, and give something new. So like the Konai, that the group locals will be familiar with, that's basically what they did to critique Ian Paisley's evangelicalism. So, but that the importance of, using those biblical resources or whatever resources to do that critique, I think it cannot be lost sight of in the philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the thing. Like, that story of the guy who pulls on the side of the road in America and says to this farmer, I'm looking for Dublin. Can you show me the way? And the guy says, well, it wouldn't start here. Right? It's stupid, right? It's like, you have to start with what you got. Like I said, and that's the Hegelian thing as well, is there's no right place to start except where you're at, whatever the resources you have and whatever tradition you have, and then go as deep into it as possible. And the idea is when you go really deeply into it, it will collapse into something more interesting, et cetera, et cetera. So and that's what Icon did. We took the resources of evangelicalism and that was our way in. And I still use some of that language. Because actually I think it's very important, because I'm very influenced by the Western philosophical tradition, but I do it less so than someone like J. Baker. J. Baker uses very Christian language to do exactly this stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then some other people will use not religious language at all to do this stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting as to whether this will be a reformation within a certain Christianity, which I think it might be, but it doesn't have to be.
Yes, because there's a certain, again, the demographics from studying this, there's a certain lack of appeal outside, people who come from the evangelical background or tradition. I mean, it's not entirely absent, but, that's just the demographic reality.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, where I'm getting the most attraction, right? And Phil Harrison, who was here last night, and I remember talking to him about this, is from people who, don't go to church, have no belief in God as a being above and or whatever, none of that. And then whenever I talk to him, I go, well, what I mean by the death of God and what I mean by Christology is the idea that the universe is not at one with itself, and that we have to enjoy that kind of conflict, and that's where change comes from. And they're going well, I can resonate with that. They go yeah. And actually what I'm finding is, in fact, at Wake, there's more and more people come to Wake who don't even know this is coming from the Christian tradition at all, and go I just heard you on some podcast, and like this notion of, and I didn't know. It's what are those people who go to church, It's and I think that it's good news for everybody. It's because you don't need to believe in God. None of this is about believing in a God. It's about believing in the death of God, i.e. it's about going, oh yeah, there's something about doubt, ambiguity, and complexity that is salvatory. There's something about that in a world where it's always about get the next iPhone, get the next car, have enough money, get enough fame, do this, do that, and then it will be amazing. Right? So fantasy by its nature, and you see it in Hollywood, is fantasy doesn't give you what you desire. Fantasy allows you to desire what you desire. So the whole point of fantasy is that like, have you seen the film Greenland at all? It's a typical disaster movie, right? But the whole world's about to be destroyed. This family unit, they don't desire each other anymore. The husband and the wife don't desire each other, whatever. And then this world destructive event happens. And the whole movie, of course, is just about how to reintroduce desire back into the family unit. So at the very end of the movie, they desire each other again. And the world is destroyed, but that's okay. That's the fantasy. They have to have the disaster to begin to be able to desire what they desire again. So you have like a star who's got loads of money. They get what they desire. They no longer desire what they desire. So they have to fantasize, this might get taken away from me. I might not get the next job. So as they can begin to desire what they desire again. Reason why I'm saying that is whenever you realize, oh yeah, it's not about getting what I want. It's actually positioning myself in an interesting way in relation to what I want, is where the satisfaction of life is. That resonates with people, and they're going like, and I can be in a community where I can find freedom from the frenetic pursuit of happiness. See, the reason why I went to Los Angeles, most religious place I've ever been in the world, every corner there's somebody's promising certainty, satisfaction. You do in happiness, if you make enough money, do some yoga poses, take some Molly, do this, that. I'm not against any of those things, but none of them work as in to give you wholeness and completeness, because that's a fantasy. So I go to LA preaching unhappiness, and people love it because you need freedom from this need to be amazing, and then weirdly in that embrace of the darkness you find the light. This is dialectics, by the way. When you're presented with two options, the light and the dark, we always go for the light. The wide, the narrow, we go for the wide. The good, the bad, we go for the good, right? Dialectics is, or we try to find a middle ground. Dialectics is always a choice for the worst. When you have two choices in front of you, the light and the dark, you go into the dark. The chaos or the cosmos, go into the chaos. Why? Because you go into the dark, you'll find the light.
Some interesting comments.
Oh, cool.
About how they're going to have to learn to listen faster if they ever come to Belfast.
What do you mean, this because I talk so fast?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to slow
Apparently we
down.
all really talk fast.
We all do, actually. It's a very
No, it's good.
Northern Irish
It's
thing.
good to get practice in. You know.
Actually, yeah, and I remember when I went to America, when I was in LA that time.
That's hilarious because I met her. I was flying to Belfast, and you got off the plane in LA, and you were getting off the plane I was getting onto. That was very bizarre.
And I walked off the plane, and I, got, off plane into the mind my own business, and then I kind of feel someone come really close to me again. Oh, what's going on? And then it's like,
It is a weirdo.
yeah, it is a weirdo, but it's a weirdo, better the weirdo you know than the Watson you. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, that was a good old coinky dink, wasn't it?
That was weird because I don't meet anybody I knew in LA, and then literally I bump into you from Belfast. That was
at the
crazy.
gate.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, trippy.
All right, well.
What would Hegel say about that?
Yeah.
Nothing. Take it away. It's the JBR Project.
another cigarette. breeze, it swept on down and taught those waves of music. You missed that song, and now we're warm again.
Give it up to the JBR Project!
Fantastic.